I'm going to jump in here really quick before we get into the podcast to let you know that there are a few changes going on with CV Ministries. One of the biggest is that we are relocating our office. And honestly, I really don't want to move all of our inventory. So if you want an opportunity to put together a training library for your team, or as you onboard new members to be able to provide them resources to get going, now is a great opportunity. Everything on our website is 50% off now through Easter, only while supplies last. So why not take advantage of this opportunity to expand your training and serving resources? You can take advantage of this savings and the opportunity by going to our website at www.cv-ministries.com. And within the website, you'll see our store there. Go in there, and anything that we have is going to be 50% off with promo code CV2021. Again, that's CV2021. Welcome to the Church Security Through Prevention podcast, and I'm your host, Daniel Blevins. My guest today is Terry Berringer with Church Emergency Consulting. Terry has been on the podcast in the past, but this time he emailed me with a few lessons learned through his time as he has served in the Ministry of Safety and Security. This is another example of someone hearing the podcast and wanting to share their experiences in hopes of helping keep other people and churches from making the same mistakes. I always appreciate the suggestions from guests. Not all of them have worked out, but they are appreciated. As usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast, as well as do a Google review for us if you get a chance. So let's get into the podcast and talk with Terry about some of the lessons learned from the mistakes that have been made. Terry, welcome back to the Church Security Through Prevention podcast.
Well, thanks, Daniel. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. It was great to get your email here this last week or so. And you had listened to one of the podcasts on the ongoing series of mistakes made, lessons learned, and sent me, a few of the things that you had experienced over the years of you doing church security or being involved in the safety and security of churches over the years. And as we've talked, even this morning before we hit record, we talked about that, it's far easier to learn from somebody else's mistakes. And like we even talked about, it's hard to say even mistakes, but yet, we make them and we have to learn from them, but it's easier to learn from somebody else's if we can than to redo them ourselves on that. So what I want to do is just really give you an opportunity to we'll just go through some of these different things that you've experienced in your life and in your time doing church safety and security, and unpack those a little bit so that people have a better understanding and hopefully give them some insight on how to do things differently in their own community.
Yeah, I love using the word learning experiences simply because the mistakes are only mistakes once. If you can then take that and bring it to somebody else's attention and help them, that's definitely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of those things that you'd like to share this morning?
Well, a couple of them that I thought was very interesting was a time where we have a relatively conservative church and relatively conservative church when it comes to worshiping. And there was one gentleman that decided he was going to worship rather kinetically, and shall we say. He was actually in the aisle waving flags during worship. And he thought that was something that he thought was going to be a good, interesting thing to do. So I went by the tech booth and touched base with the production manager. And I said, I pointed and said, "Hey, are you aware of this?" And he went, "Nope, not ours." So I approached the gentleman and just cautiously, obviously, because he's waving flags around. And I said, "Sir, you're kind of in the way here, blocking traffic. Can you perhaps step outside into the lobby, or can we discuss this?" And he got very angry and approached me quite sternly and kind of postured a little bit. And I held my hand up, and he kind of walked into my hand. And as he walked into my hand, I stopped him, and he immediately threw his flags down and marched out to the lobby where one of our elders, the church elders, was. And he started yelling at the church elders saying, "Are you aware of what this man did to me? He touched me. Are you going to let him touch me?" And I said, sir, I didn't touch you. You stepped into my hand. And the elder immediately stepped forward and said, we not only accept what he did, but we are actually paying him to do what he did. So his job is to keep this building safe, and you were making it an unsafe environment. And I thought that was very interesting. But at that point in time, we had no physical use of force policies. When he said I touched him, meaning I put my hand up and I touched his chest, I realized at that point in time we had no use of force procedures, policies, or anything. And that's one of the things I really see as a huge mistake of churches and security teams and safety teams, of not having the written procedures out front and available for everybody.
Right. Yeah, that is huge, and a lot of churches don't think about it, and they don't realize they don't have to reinvent the wheel. That there's a lot of churches out there with policies and procedures in a variety of areas, and even through podcasts that we've had, that are willing to share them with other churches,
Yeah.
to be able to help adapt it to theirs. And I just don't think churches really realize the value in that and the liability that they're in if they don't have them. Something else that you brought up too, two great points. We've had we are not a Pentecostal church, but we've had a few people worship in that a little more outwardly than normal, which is okay. We are okay with it as long as it doesn't detract from the service. Obviously, waving flags, that's a detraction. If he had just stepped out in the aisle, raising his hands and worshiping, might have been less of a distraction than it would have been than waving the flags. So we had some gal that used to, this was years and years ago, but she would kind of run around the outer ring. We have like a lower end of our main worship center. Then we have a walking ring, and then a kind of almost like a balcony, but it's all on the same floor.
Peter style.
Yeah, it's a theater style. And so she's in that back area and going back and forth, and very much being a distraction to it, to where it wasn't necessarily a security point. People brought it to our attention, but we took it from the standpoint of, love the worship, and kind of like the elder did. He stepped in. Same sort of thing. We gave it to one of our pastors to say, okay, why don't you have a conversation with her on that? We do have what we call a no-fly zone from the front pew to the stage. Anybody that enters that area, now our attention's a little more heightened at that point. Somebody touches the stairs, and we're watching body language. People could go kneel, pray, or whatever the case is on that. But the other point you made is you went to the booth and you checked with them to see if it was an element of the service that you weren't aware of happening. And we've kind of learned from that too, to where now the worship department will notify us from a security standpoint. Hey, let you guys know we have a thematrical element happening. They actually had a guy dressed up like a homeless individual, and it was part of a skit that they were incorporating into the service. Stand up, get into the aisle, and go up on stage. And they wanted to make sure that we knew, so that we did not remove this guy as if he was somebody that just wandered up onto the stage. Right. Yeah. So they've learned as well. So you brought up a great point. It's that communicate. We have to have that communication to where I'd much rather know ahead of time than after the fact. And they would much rather have us not ruin an element of the service.
Exactly.
If it's something that they've had planned on that. So
there's been several occasions, and you've seen the history of church incidents where the incident started to occur, and several people in the audience or the congregation thought it was a skit. One of them being was a recent shooting, recent being a couple years back, and it wasn't until they saw the bullet hitting the Bible and the pages flying that they realized, oh, this isn't a skit. This is something more.
Yeah. Again, in today's church, we just can't take those things for granted.
And there is
communications.
A large, theatrical, for the lack of terms, I don't mean it theatrical, but there is some theatrical aspects of worship nowadays. People expect not just to come and sit and sing a song and here's pastor, they want something more. And when they want something more, they expect something. And a lot of times those are types of, more colorful events. So yeah, it's the changing worship scene that we're living in right now.
Yep. Yeah, and nothing wrong with it. And it goes back to a little bit of what I often refer to as that total team concept, to where the worship component, the pastor, the ushers, everybody's got to be on board on that security aspect.
Yeah, and it goes back to
in order,
training.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
training
Training,
and communication.
communication, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So what else have you got?
Um, the two that I think I want to combine together again was, and you had mentioned in a previous podcast that you're one of the leaders of your church brought somebody to you and said this person would be a good man for your team or a good person for your team, and didn't quite work out the way you thought it was going to work out. I had a gentleman that was brought to me and to be a team lead, and he was just not he was not team lead material. And I made the mistake of right away volunteering, putting him in a position that they thought he would be good at without vetting him, without doing a whole lot of interviewing. And that's another thing which I'd like to get into in a little bit, interviewing potential security team members. But what had occurred was he was just not doing his job. And I tried mentoring him. I tried having another person come alongside of him and mentor him. And when I'd say, okay, we have to do A, B, and C, and he would just look at me and say, well, I don't like B, so I'm not going to do it. Okay, that's not how this works. And I just remember sitting to myself thinking, you really stink at this. But I couldn't say that to him because afterwards I found out he was a next door neighbor and really good friend of one of our church leadership. And that person was not going to back me. And that's one thing that I think we need to discuss as well. Sometimes when you're trying to do the right thing at the right time, sometimes the leadership is not on board. And we've actually had a situation where when our team first started, our senior pastor would actually try to evade us. He would go into a bathroom that had two doors to it, and he'd go out the other door. So we would try to avoid us, or he'd go down the back steps from the stage instead of coming off the front of the stage after he spoke, just to try to get around us and just to get away from us. And it wasn't until we had a finally nice little discussion with him to say, hey, we're here to protect you, not to annoy you. And he has eventually learned, especially because he started working with some national programs. And I said to him, dealing with the local crazy people and local people who don't like you is one thing, but if you're going national, you're looking at a whole nother ball game here. So we really need to step up our game. And that's when I think he realized that we were serious and we were doing our job and we were doing it well. And so once again, communication, training with those people who you're working with, the senior pastor, the music director, the tech director, training with these people is super vital and important with those kind of things. The main thing I really wanted to talk about as far as bringing people on board for your team is two parts of it. One is interviewing these people. The major error mistake that I made when I first started incorporating this team was I decided to tell people, oh, you would be a good fit. Come on board to this team. You only have to serve one service a month. You have to be there for like half an hour, 15 minutes, half an hour before service starts, and you can leave as soon as service is done. And as the team grew and as the church grew from a 700 member church to a 5,000 member church, the security aspect changed a little bit as well. We were requiring that people got there 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. The team leads got there an hour early and stay for at least half an hour afterwards, or till the last person left. And those were things that were not incorporated into the original, I don't want to say contract, but the original verbal contract that I made with these ladies and gentlemen. And it came to the point where I was now asking them to do a whole lot more than I had originally promised them. And I'm a fool. I'm a man of my word. And when I tell people one thing, I stick to it. And I had to go back and say, hey, I messed up. Can you come in earlier? And then we started having national concerts. Stephen Curtis Chapman, some of the big names that were coming in. And we were asking these guys to work these concerts, to work security for these concerts. And those kind of things were not in the original plan when I started the whole concept. And so it's really important to not only discuss with the prospective security members what you expect from them, but we actually interview not only the person, but we also interview the family members, the husband or wife, or the mother and father, or kids, or whatever, whenever we do interviews now, just because it's important that they know what their spouse, father, brother, whatever is going to be involved in, and what is going to be required of them. And the other aspect of that is we're requiring that at no time can you volunteer for any other ministry if you're volunteering for the security ministry, because it is such a demanding, emotional, physical, and most importantly, time-consuming ministry. And I don't think there's a whole lot of ministries out there that have that same requirement that the security team does.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm glad you brought up those points. The past few podcasts that I've recorded, that whole interview concept has come up in our conversation. And everybody does it just a little bit different, but for the most part, everybody's on the same page with it. But it's good to get different perspectives on what that looks like, and explaining to them in a realistic term what that time looks like between training and serving. That's it. There is really no other ministry out there besides maybe the worship aspect that puts as much time into, from a volunteer standpoint, in many cases, into serving at the church.
The time requirements are crucial, and the expectations are so high that you really got to think about who you're bringing on onto these teams. You just never know what you're going to be asked to do. And once again, we were talking earlier how oftentimes security is asked to do everything and anything, and how many times security would be asked to, can somebody's in the parking lot with a flat tire, can you go help them fix their flat tire?
Right.
These are things that the worship team's not doing. I'm not knocking the worship team. There's so many different things, custodial issues, and in the same sense, I then had to train, when I'm training teams, have to explain to them, if your job is to watch the front door, you cannot be the person that goes out and helps unload packages for a birthday party coming in after church. You can't do that, because your job is to watch that front door, not to haul packages back and forth. You're more than happy to get on the radio and ask for maintenance to come help, or find somebody else, but that is not your job. And that your job is to be the eyes and the ears, sometimes not the hands that deliver the pizzas when they come in.
We just want to take a quick break here to let you know how to contact us and where to find out more about our national seminar. I see communities that may know why church security is important, but they may not be doing anything about it or don't know how to do it well. Our national seminars are for ushers, greeters, children's workers, staff, volunteers, your security teams, and other ministries in your community. We say that this is a level 1 training that is designed to help equip you to serve well in your various ministries while maintaining a safe place for people to come. Getting churches on the same or similar page when it comes to security will only make the community safer as well. The easiest way to find out more information or to contact us is to go to cv-ministries.com. There you'll find a variety of training DVDs and books, with more being developed all the time. There's also a place at the bottom of the page where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter and to be able to get more information. We would love your feedback on topics or guests that you would like to hear on future podcasts. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, absolutely. And communicating that to an individual in a loving way. I even, this last weekend, I was in what we call our Connect area, where a lot of our first-time guests come, or people come to get plugged, to get more information about different things. And I was standing there because we actually had an individual we were kind of keeping an eye on. Just some of his behavior. He was wearing a Carhartt jacket, and he had put his hood up over his head towards the end of the service. All these kinds of things that were just a little out of the norm. He walked back there, and so I was kind of hanging out back there. But this woman came up to me and said, "Hey, can you help me get plugged in, or into a community group?" And I said, "Ma'am, you know what? Right now, I would love to. I can point you in the right direction, um, but right now, I'm actually part of the security ministry here." And she's like, "Oh, okay, nope, I totally get it. But I didn't harshly say no. I didn't. It's how we communicate that. Or if somebody wants help, like you said, carrying things in.
Yeah.
If I've got a second guy out there at the front door, then yep, maybe so. I might
Yeah.
get help. But if I don't, then it's like, I'm sorry, I can't right now. But you know what? I know a young man right inside that I bet I can get for you, to help you do that, or whatever the case is on that. But yeah, yeah, because there's an example, and I've got a photo of it, and I use it for situational awareness of a church that I worked with, where they have an armed security component, and they tie up his hands by holding this giant offering bag for the ushers to dump the offering into, um, as they come out the door. And I said, now you have just taken, when I did a threat assessment at their church, I said, you've taken this individual out of being able to protect if he needed to protect in some way.
You've literally tied up his hands.
You've literally tied up his hands. Yeah. So, it's being conscientious of that. Yep. We want to be servant leaders. We want to help out where we can, but yet we can't pull away from or detract from our ability to be able to respond to something if we needed to.
Yeah, there was some things that were silly as well. That was, we would have people who missed the offering basket, and they would come up to one of the security personnel and hand them a check and say, "Can you take care of this?" No, we're not accounting. We're not. I will be happy to, point you to someone to go to, but that's not security's. Security's job is to kind of keep an eye over the offering, not to actually participate in carrying or handling the offering. I think it's a little bit of a judgment call there, but I don't think that the security should be on dealing with the offering other than observing.
I agree to a point. Somebody that maybe wrote their check late or something like that. We've had them come up and give them to us from a security standpoint. They may not know that we're not ushers either,
True.
and we'll just say, "Sure, we'll take care of this for you." And most of the guys, they'll either come to me and say, "Dan, what do we do with this?" It's like, "Here, I'll show you. Here's what we do with it," or we'll take it into the ushers room while they're and give it to those guys. But we don't want them to feel like, you're right. It's a judgment call, and every church's
Yeah.
dynamic is going to be different. But we actually have it to where, nope, we're still going to help them out. Yep, we'll take it because we are security. So if somebody wants to hand me a check or two because they didn't get it in, great. That I should be able to be trusted to get it to the right place within the church for them from that customer service.
Well, I don't think
servant.
trust is an issue, because I mean, these guys I would trust with my life, and I've trusted
Sure.
with my family. But I think a lot of times it's the appearance of impropriety. We always make sure that no one ever had a check in their hand with just one person there, that there was at least two people there. And there was an incident where an usher was walking through the way their church was set up, was there was the front of the church, and the back door of the church was a long hallway underneath. So they would take the offering and go down the back steps, and then one person would walk the length of the hall and up to the offices, which was on the other side of the building. And it was a church that was not air conditioned, and they had all the windows open. And as that one person was walking through there, one of the checks actually flew out without him knowing it, and from the breeze from the window. And he got up there and handed it to them, and they counted it, and they did everything they were supposed to do properly. And the person who wrote that check contacted the office and said, "My check hasn't been cashed. Where is it?" Well, yeah, that puts a little bit of a suspicion on people that we don't need to have done. And ended up, they did find the check almost a week and a half later, in a corner of a room that it had blown into, and it was behind a garbage can. So yeah, those kind of things, you try not to leave open that opportunity. I tell people all the time, you not only want to not do the right thing, but you want to remove any appearance of impropriety. And that's so important, that the appearance and the way people are seeing, and the way people are seeing you is so important. And once again, that all still goes back to training. And I hate to keep beating that horse, but training, and communication. Those two things I think are super important on so many aspects.
Yep, absolutely. Oops, sorry, I had it muted. Yeah, absolutely. Training is important, and this is why we spend so much time on the podcast talking about a variety of training issues or training opportunities or training ways to train better. Because if we're not training in our own time, whether it's situational awareness, the OODA loop, those are only things that you can train, in your day-to-day activities, in your interactions with people from a day-to-day standpoint. It's not something that's always going to, we're not law enforcement to where we get to do it all the time. So yeah,
Yeah, that's very true. And it's interesting. I'm still amazed how, and once again, as we discussed earlier, I'm in the Northeast of the United States, and there's so many churches that either still don't have any type of security, or if they do have a security team, it's, well, Bobby, and Joe over there have their concealed carry permits. They're our security. Well, that's not a trained security team. And those places that do have somewhat of a security team are not doing training. And it's kind of mind-boggling with everything that's going on nowadays, how many places either don't have a team or have a team and don't train. It's like I said, it's a little mind-boggling.
It is. I think we're starting to see the tide turn a little bit, to see that mentality shift. We've seen it in our own church. We're seeing it in churches. It's a lot like the Titanic. It's a big ship and just a little rudder that is changing it. But I think more and more people are, in churches are beginning to realize that, through whether it's a podcast like this or other avenues, that you can't, in today's day and age, you have to do something. Doing nothing or failing to do it well creates a liability issue for the church. And they're starting to realize that more and more, whether it's through their insurance company or through other means, that they can't neglect not providing a safe environment, because there's precedent now. There's legal precedent, not just from the violence precedent. There's a legal precedent that basically requires that this happen now.
Liability is no longer something that can be pushed under the rug. You used to be, ignorance is no excuse. And for years, people were just like, well, whatever happens, and that may have made sense years ago, but in today's litigious society, there are so many. I mean, there's a lawyer behind every fence post trying to find something to sue for. And why give the church why give somebody ammunition against the church is, I guess, what I'm thinking there.
Right. All right, Terry. So is there anything else before we wrap this up that you'd like to cover?
There's one thing. The only other thing I was going to mention, as far as maybe some errors that were made. We have the church I was working at had a bathroom that was on the lobby of the church. And there was actually, when the building was designed, it was an add-on, which most churches are done in piecework. So there's always an addition and another addition and an addition to that addition. Well, this addition consisted of a bathroom that had an entryway into the youth area, as well as to the main lobby. And as we're watching the lobby, we noticed this woman standing outside the men's room. And, we kind of passed by and just took note of her, and came by a little bit later, and she's still standing there outside the men's room. So we thought, well, something's kind of odd here. So I approached her and said, ma'am, I said, can I ask you why you're standing outside the men's room? She said, yes, my father's in there. He has Alzheimer's, and I'm standing here to make sure he gets out okay. I said, oh, okay. I said, let me go in and take a look and see if there's there's a problem. I go in, and there's absolutely nobody in the restroom. And I came out and I said, ma'am, I said, no, there's nobody in there. Are you sure your father didn't come out while you weren't looking? And she goes, no, I've been staring at that door the whole time. I said, ma'am, are you aware that there's another door to that restroom that goes out the other side? And she said, no, I was not. Well, immediately got on the radio and got a description of him from his daughter. And he had done just that. He had used the restroom and went out the other door and walked down the hall and to the opposite end of the building, and was seen going out the door on the opposite end of the building, which goes down around a curve and then onto a major highway. And at which point, once again, the radio crackled with all the information, and we were able to obtain him about 15, 20 feet outside of the building as he was starting to walk down the road. And when we approached, we said, are you, Mr. Smith? And he said, yes, I am. I can't find my daughter. I'm going to walk home and see if she's home. And we immediately saw that as not only a potential incident, but an error on our part. First of all, for not letting people know that there is a second bathroom entrance to that room, but also whenever you are building, to have security being part of that building development. Because had I known then what I know now, obviously, we would not have had a bathroom that had a back door going into another section of the building. And once again, this is just one of those things that security needs to be not just active in your church, it needs to be proactive and part of the planning. There's that old adage, whenever you're running cameras to a church, or to any building, it's much cheaper to run the wiring while the walls are still being put up than after the walls are put up. And this is the same situation. It would have been much easier for us to make the plans and do the planning prior to this. And that the restroom has not been changed. It still has two entrances. But now, whenever we see somebody standing outside, we approach them and ask them, are you waiting for someone to go in, or is it is your son or family member in there? And, are you aware that there's two entrances? But one of those things that all it would have taken was pre-planning to say, okay, we need to put a wall up here, and, would have solved a lot of problems. But once again, one of those things you can learn from that we've done that didn't quite work out as well as we hoped it would. So it's going to be one of those learning experiences that I hope it would be able to be passed on to anybody who's listening.
Yeah, and you make a great point that churches don't, when they build them, at least a lot of the older buildings in particular, they were around long before we even thought about church security. But as we have new builds or extensions or whatever the case is, we are looking at, from our standpoint, how can we leverage be part of that process with the architects in it? How can we help churches to understand the importance of architecturally designing it appropriately to begin with? I mean, they do it for prisons, they do it from a security standpoint, and they do it from a medical standpoint, and a variety of other aspects of it. Same thing with churches. We need to look at it from all aspects. Oftentimes, the things that kind of suffer is, okay, we want these rooms and we want all these chairs and tables to be able to be set up and so on in this room, but we don't have any storage. We forgot to write in storage space so that when the room gets taken down for some reason, where do we put all these things? I've seen that issue within churches. I've done a threat assessment at a church, and I literally, when I went back to brief them on it, I literally drew a wall in, I take a lot of pictures, and I took the picture, drew a wall in, and said, for the security of the children, and they did. They built a wall and put it in there and put secure doors there for that reason, to reduce the access, limit the access a little bit more to the children's area. Churches need to either get somebody that isn't familiar with the building, but to look at it from a security standpoint, or if they can set aside their own bias and say, no, we've always done it this way, or it's always been this way, it's fine. If they can set that aside and look at it from a security standpoint of what is the risk and vulnerability in the design that we currently have, and what can we do to fix that? Sometimes there's an expense to it. Oftentimes it's really not that big of an expense to make some minor changes, just to how the flow of the people, all those things, like the restroom, not a huge expense to, limit it down to one door if they wanted to. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, when doing threat assessments, I have encountered the same as you just mentioned. How many times will we walking by and say, well, that door needs, a canuter valve, and someone will say, wow, you know what, we never realized that, because they're looking at it from a daily walking by that door, not looking and not paying attention, and having that outside set of eyes that is looking at it from a different perspective. Because whenever we do go in to do threat assessments, we're looking at it as how the bad guy sees it, what's the bad guy thinking about, and a lot of people can't go into that that negative aspect of life, and see how people would want to do bad would see things. And it's interesting. It's kind of part of what we do. We as security at church, we try to see what the most likely possibility of something would happen, and try to mitigate it, or try to prevent it completely. And a lot of that is, once again, proactive. And as you well know, churches are not known to be very proactive at all sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Terry, I sure appreciate you coming on today and sharing some of these thoughts with us and for our listeners. And we'll make sure that we put your contact information. They can either contact me directly, and I'll get it over to you if they have more questions about anything. But I'll also put your contact information into the show notes, so that, like we did last time,
Yep.
so that they know how to get a hold of you as well. And if you missed earlier podcasts with Terry, you can scroll back through and look at last year and when we had him on. And
that was a whole year ago.
Well, yeah, at least the calendar year. I mean, I've only been so that the podcast, we had our anniversary, back in December. Basically.
Yes, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, 1 year, and I never would have thought God would have. I mean, this has never would have thought this would even happen. This last week we rolled over 25,000 first-time listeners to the podcast.
Exciting.
And I never thought there would be that kind of a response as well. So it continues to grow, and God continues to use it, and I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful for the individuals like yourself that do come on and want to share some of their story to hopefully help other churches out as well around the country.
Well, it's a great privilege and an honor of mine. And like I said before, this is a podcast that is unlike many others. It reaches ways that some podcasts are not quite able to. So I really appreciate how God is using you, and how you've opened up and allowed God to use you to do this, and to help train and to educate and communicate. Those are the three things that we want to leave on.
All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. If you really enjoyed it and you found it of benefit to you, we really appreciate your feedback. There's several different ways that you can provide us feedback. One of them is to subscribe to the podcast, is to share it with others, and another is to contact us directly, particularly if you have any questions or concerns, or you want more information on how to host a seminar in your community. You can contact me directly at danielblevins@cv@heart.com, or you can go to our website, that's cv-ministries.com. Both of those will get you in the right direction. Until next time, make sure that you're out there protecting the flock with a heart of service.